Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a very pleasant night to you, my precious pack, and welcome back once more to Vega Conflict, and you read that right, it's time for another Let's Chat. Well, this one is actually the one that I had cancelled previously. I'm actually using the portions of it that were fully edited and stuff like that, but the primary point is I want to talk one more time about Tier 11 in the comments section, and just in general, do an entire blanket from the beginning to the end cover of Tier 11. Just in general, see exactly what was going on, what everyone was thinking, so go ahead and talk a bit about them down below and I'll join you, because that's the point. But that's going to be it for now. I'll see you at the end of the video. The Anvil Carrier. I can say it went into the game in a state that I wasn't too fond of because it didn't really have a purpose in my opinion, because if I'm only going to be using something for a field special, well, I better not be using it at all. Because unlike our older carriers, it's much more easy to take damage in the current tiers, to say the least, especially with the lack of shield regeneration. A very poor decision, and I'm going to say that a lot during this Let's Chat. So, let's actually get to the very nice features of it, and then we'll move on to the next vessel. And yes, I'm going to be focusing a little bit on the positive aspects for the most part. And if I don't talk about a vessel you like, it's either A, I didn't find any positive aspects about it that I personally liked, or I just didn't care about it. Okay, so Anvil, the primary feature that it's going to have is extremely high damage per second due to the squadron buff. Loved it. And on top of that, it has a 50% increased damage against Liberatus, Spectres, and Astral Barony vessels and bases. Basically anything that's under their category, they're going to be taking increased damage. Don't care about anything under it, so hangar, armor, shield mass, all that stuff, don't care. Let's actually go to the squadrons, which are, let's see here. And yes, we're going to skip out on talking about the field, because a 25% boost to armor health and shield energy doesn't mean much when the majority of the vessels I prefer running already have a 50% or higher bonus. So, not much of a point in talking about it when it's kind of irrelevant for the vessels I use. Okay, let's take a look at the squadrons. We'll start with the extrication. And I'm not going to specify whether it's 1 or 2, because it'll be a mixture of them. So right off the bat, you're doing high kinetic damage per second, and you have a 30-second flight time. And you have a scramble range of 10,000 meters. But you have a very, very low speed of only 2,000 meters. But you're very healthy at 400,000 hit points, which is what allows the newer versions of squadrons to be effective in combat again. I may also be daring enough to say you could potentially use them to run solo against some targets and take an old carrier tactic of running away and letting squadrons mop up everything. Now, they also feature shield disruption, but I mean, the shield disruption is such a low level at only 2% and 6% for the level 2 that you'd have to literally use the level 3 and above just to make it worth it, so it's not really worth mentioning in this video. Now, next up is going to be the Net Squadron, and don't let that confuse you, it's not related to the Net Torpedo or anything like that. It is actually an energy-based squadron with an overcharge ability, but primary statistics are energy damage is the base, 30-second flight time, just like the previous, scramble range of 9,000 meters, but it has a high movement speed of 6,000 meters per second, so it can get to that maximum scramble range in only 1.5 seconds. So, very quick. And again, as with the buff they received, extremely high base value of health to the point where they, in many cases, can exceed vessels themselves. So, yeah. As for the overcharge details, well, it lasts for 30 seconds, and depending on which version you're using, your damage per second is going to be increased by 1%. It's going to be increased by 3%, 4%, or 5% per second, up to a maximum value that alters, and for level 1, it's 100% increase, level 2 it's 110%, and for the level 3 it's most likely 120% with that little increase. So that's what the Net features. It features an overcharge ability, not anything special. Well, for a squadron, it's actually special, but for weapons and things like that, not that special.
On our way.
And the final squadron is the Breach Squadron, and they have a Debilitate ability, which I just oh so love whenever you can actually apply it, because increasing the damage a single vessel takes is also a very, very nice little feature. But they have a 30-second flight time, and they're in between the kinetic and the energy at 9,500 meter scramble range, and they're only slightly faster than the kinetic squadron with 3,000 meters per second, so it'll take them over 3 seconds to reach out to the maximum range. But when they do, they'll be doing high levels of explosive damage per second, depending on how many make it through. And all it takes is just one of them to apply a single application of Debilitate for 5 seconds, which will increase all damage they target takes by 10%. In my opinion, the Debilitate of this specific craft is more impressive than that of the Kinetic's Shield Disruption. Because it's not a very specific thing, it's just a general damage increase. And level 2 features a 15% increase, and the level 3 should feature 20 or 25%. Can't recall which, but not going to check. Okay, as for the repurposed squadrons, which is the special that's featured with them, it increases the damage per shot, which is basically damage per second in the case of squadrons, by 15%. So your already impressive damage values just get more impressive. And it also boosts the already impressive health values that are rivaling and surpassing many ships to higher levels. So you're quite literally flying around a carrier with a high level of durability. And the downside of it is called slow recharge, and yes, it's a little bit horrid to say the least. When any of your any of 6 squadrons that are equipped are destroyed or returned, it'll increase the reload time, so it'll take you a while to launch them again. So hope that you don't lose all of them when they launch, because at Mark 6, if I'm not mistaken, has 7 squadron slots. So if it tries to launch and they'll get wiped out, you're basically defenseless and you can't do anything with it at that point. Because the cooldown is a 500% increase from whatever the base value is. So yeah, it goes from you have extremely overpowered squadrons to I had extremely overpowered squadrons and now I'm dead. And the final thing is the field extender, and this is entirely up to the individuals. And if I'm not mistaken, it actually wasn't functioning properly until the most recent update, which is happening fairly soon. I can't recall exactly when. But so far it wasn't functioning properly. It literally wasn't increasing the support field range. It was just taking away the shield energy, and that was about it. But that's literally all it does. It increases support field range, which is, what, 8,000 meters on the carrier? Should be 8,000. Yeah, 8,000 meters, so it boosts up to 12,000, which does make it a little bit more flexible depending on what vessels you're using. So if you're using vessels that don't exactly have health or shield boosts, it'd be a nice support vessel because it would increase the amount of time they have before they get blown up, or just in general decrease the amount of repair time you have after a battle due to artificial hit points.
Reporting.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the next vessel now. Don't expect me to talk about it or the next couple too long, because each of them aren't exactly paired with tech and stuff like that. They're primarily alone because the tech is more or less mix and match, whereas with the carriers, well, they have some dedicated tech to them. Ah yes, the Stalker, the vessel that I fully mark upgraded and then never used. You're going to hear that a lot as well, just like the thing of hating the lack of shield regeneration, but let's talk about the Ranger for just a few minutes here, just like we did with the Carrier. So in regards to how it plays, it's what you'd expect of a Ranger, except for that I'm not a fan of the range. You only have a 3,000 meter firing range unless you use a special to increase, well, the experimental salvage slot to increase the maximum range. However, I have a different idea that I'll be testing out in a different video. For now, I'll just have to say this. Toxic, if you watch this, you'll get this right away because I've talked about this before, especially when I was still tier 6. The Wall of Guns. I have 2 weapons in mind and I'll have to try them out, but in regards to how it plays and how it behaves in the game, well, I do think it could use some changes and stuff like that. The first thing I would suggest changing is dropping that minimum effective range from 6,000 down to 5,000. Give it a little bit more leeway there, guys. It could use it. As for durability and stuff like that, it doesn't need it. It's got range on its side. It's got speed on its side. I mean, it can strafe faster than it can move forward, so, yeah. There's not much that I really want to say about it, because, again, I didn't really play with the Stalkers originally. I mostly just bypassed them. I used my Dreadnought to upgrade them, and here I am. Statistically, we have the full reversibility to take a look at, and it's not anything special statistically. It's got a 25% increase in damage against both Spectre and Astral Barony, so boring. Shield energy boost, nice, but then it's got the stupid delay under it, so kind of pointless. And it's got stasis resistance. It's got a health damage boost. I'd never realized it had that. That gives me an idea for the build as well, because I'm going to be boosting the health damage up a lot anyways due to specials. I wonder what that would do in the long run. Suggested changes though. Well, the only thing I could think of actually putting forward would be just increase the stuff I said and increase the, well, decrease the minimum range, but increase the damage that it does against Spectre and Astral Barony by 25%, so boost it up to a 50% increase. Make it hit just a little bit harder. Weapon mass. Doesn't really matter as much. Okay. What is full reverse? 20 vessels are in the firing arc. It gets a boost to rear speed. Okay, so it just basically runs backwards faster and it fires faster. That'll actually fit with the Wall of Guns thing, because it's a one-click type of setup. Interesting. And then resistance, energy resistance, and Spectre resistance. Okay, I thought it was a lot different. I guess this part for the Destroyer is going to be the Ranger is going to be a lot shorter, because I thought it was a lot different than it actually is. I honestly have like no gripes against this thing. As far as I'm aware, the people that do use it have had an acceptable time with it, or at least a good time with it, and the people that don't, I mean, it doesn't seem like you're missing out on much, because we have a freaking Dreadnought that literally just flexes on everything, so I don't know why we need to focus on the Destroyer, a Ranger. I'm never going to stop calling them Destroyers, because I mean, that's what they are, they're just jacked up now. But overall, Stalker-wise, there's a few things we could talk about in the comment section about it that I would like to change that I've already stated, but there's a few more, and the first thing I should ask is, what do you think should be changed about it? Do you think anything should be changed about it? The one thing I would love to see with Tier 12 is a return to the classic style. Cruiser, battleship, destroyer, carrier. Possibly a Corvette in there, just to spice it up, but then have the classic range value, so no effective range garbage like what we have now. Go built-in range boosts to separate what's what, allow more flexibility with the builds, things like that. I'd love to have another Wall of Guns build instead of Destroyers again, where they're not capped by range and I could put any weapon on them and they'd just get a 50% boost, so it'd be that long range you expect of them. But, yeah. I can't think of anything else to say, so let's move on to the next vessel, shall we? Okay, before we even officially start with this one, I just have to make a comment. I made a little prompt to start each of the videos with, well, each portion of the recording so far, and I haven't been using it, and I just want to cover it now while I'm going over and looking at it, and I also have to talk about the folders they're in, because they're also named, and I should have definitely been reading them just for that little bit of either amusing setup or just to introduce them, but the anvils were supposed to be, after the buff to squadrons, it isn't so much of a hindrance to having a fleet. And that was supposed to give the leeway into talking about it. The stock was supposed to be, don't know about this one, never actually used them in any major capacity, though I have an idea for them for later, which is the wall of guns idea that I was hinting at. And then, this is what the scavenger is. This is one we're going to be talking about in just a moment. I built up 6 elite scavengers, then never tested them because I wasn't a fan of their lack of firepower, or the spawn for that matter. Okay, let's go ahead and let's close that. Now can you guess what the folder is? I named it that stupid spawn thing. Because I am not a fan of the scavenger, but I mean, while I'm not a fan of it, I can't completely say that it's useless because, again, spawns always have a use. They will never not have a use. The point of them is to be a meat shield, and that's precisely the purpose they fill. So, yeah. Scavenger-wise, I can't really fault it because it's not my cup of tea, but someone else might like it. But overall, it's a very average vessel in regards to statistics, so I don't think we have to talk about it all that much. And yes, this is going to be a very short section of the video, because again, I'm just not too much a fan of it, so I'm going to skim over most of it and get on to the next one, which is one I like a little bit more. Okay, let's just go over the quick assemble skill really quick. Quick assemble. When you destroy 2 vessels, it'll spawn a wrecker, which is their spawn. So, yeah. As for the details, well, actually, first off, we'll go through the spawn thing. Unlike other spawn vessels, you can't trigger and switch them between defend and attack because their range is so low, they're always going to be right near your vessel, so no matter what you're doing, it's not going to really matter. As for the actual details, well, unlike the carrier, the dreadnought spawns that we had recently, this one doesn't really lack anything. It's got health, it's got shielding, it's got the damage resistance, everything like that. It's got everything you could possibly want. And then you see at the very bottom there, you see those 3 little red icons. You got charge disruption, cooldown disruption, fire disruption, and guess what? All 3 of them suck. Because the weapon they gave this thing misses so often. How does it apply any of those very nice stats? Well, 5% and of both cooldown charge, that's kind of stupid, but it's got fire disruption, and it can hardly hit anything. It's like, oh, hey, look, I'm strafing. Oh, no, you can't hit me anymore. What's it supposed to do in that situation? It's like, oh, it's only for very slow vessels. Guess what? Those very slow vessels tend to have a very specific weapon style, and they're not going to miss. It will die on approach and never even get to fire. It's just how pathetic it is. That's just... Ugh. I don't like it at all. Okay, and the other one is the restraining system. One get bogged down, blah blah blah. When 2 enemies enter its firing arc, it can apply stasis and it gets a speed boost for a couple of seconds. That's it. So it applies an effect that we could just have as a weapon rather than this stupid thing. And then you gave it a speed boost. Why? You could have done any number of other things, and it's just like the restraining system. Okay, I understand that it could be used to apply stasis for any weapon, a nice little trait. And the duration is okay. Why does it have to have an increase in mobility, though? If it's just restraining them, Okay, we're going to go on to the next vessel before I start bashing my head against my keyboard, because I don't want to have any brain damage or anything like that after this. We're not even going to talk about the resistance. It's not worth it, so... Moving on. The hammer's coming down with this one, everybody. That's because it's the one and the only, the hammer itself. It is our warship, and it is essentially a super Titan, because it has the majority of the aspects you'd expect a Titan to have, only with increased range. Overall, it's been a very pleasant vessel to use in combat, and I honestly have several different builds for them. The current one is, well, I'll keep that secret for now, because there will be a follow-up video specifically featuring them with the fitting. But for now, I have a number of suggestions, so rather than go over all of these stats and resistances, let's just skip all of that and get right to the fun part of this. And yes, you've waited long enough, it's time for the fun part of the video. So, when we first heard tell of the warship coming to the game, I had a number of questions, but a few of them were answered in due time. But the thing I was left with was, I wanted more from it, but not in a term of just all-out power that leaves it in a state where it is just consistently performing better than everything else. I wanted it to fill more of a role that it already fills the role I want it to fill, but I want to do so better,
Moving out.
if you know what I mean. And suggestions that I have, for the most part, they are flat buffs in certain respects, but in other ones they're retroactive to the combat. So, the first thing that I had in mind with it was actually something that I think everyone would enjoy. It was just a scaling damage. If anyone remembers back from the Umbral tier with tier 8, they specifically had the Bloodlust ability, and as they're dealing damage, they're doing more damage. I was thinking of a similar system where something could be built in as a passive ability for the hammer. Every 1 or 2 volleys, it would increase the rate of fire by 1 or 2%. Up to a maximum, of course, but nothing that would be absurd that would match our experimental salvages, because you don't want to make them obsolete, but you also want something to be built into the vessel, other than just it being a long-range Titan. The other ability is, I think this one will be a little bit more entertaining. What would you do if your vessel got faster and faster the more it fought, fired more and more? This is a mixture of the previous recommendation, or previous suggestion. But essentially, it's the exact same system. It deals damage, but it becomes faster, and it increases projectile speed instead. So rather than a damage bonus, or a flat damage per second increase by increasing the rate of fire, the projectiles will land slightly more reliably because they're flying more quickly. And in the case of the increased mobility, well, that could either be to reposition, or to close in on a different target. However you want to see it, but those are the two main suggestions. And the third one is actually one that's bouncing around the same night that I've actually sat down to record this portion of the video. And that's actually to give it a passive spawn. And I'm not talking Wrecker or Point Defense Drone, I mean Mini-Dom.
Proceeding to destination.
No, I'm talking more of a spawn dedicated specifically to supporting the exact role this vessel fills. By all intents and purposes, the little spawn that I have in mind could only have one mode that's defensive. However, it should have a trait that doesn't allow it to be targeted, so it can only act by firing at enemy vessels.
Proceeding to destination.
However, I was thinking, rather than just having it fire enemy vessels, what about, out of every single volley of their attacks, it will target once every 5 seconds and shoot down a projectile, effectively reducing the damage you take by literally preventing the damage before it ever reaches your vessel. That's probably the most broken but also the most boring one that you're probably going to hear, but that's the point of these Let's Chats. It's to talk about things that could be pointless but could be talked about until they reach a point where they're either A, going to be laid to rest, or B, brought to fruition and made into a fully fledged suggestion they can then be brought before the team, shoved into one of their faces, and said, hey, look at this, we have an idea, regardless of how stupid or good it is. But, yeah, that's about all I want to do suggestions-wise for the hammer, because it's late, I want to get some rest, and I don't want to drag the hammer's name through the mud. So, yeah. On to the next vessel. And as with the past me having said all of that, finally, it was supposed to be a 30-minute video at the time, but then after a while I decided, well, what's the point of this? The Let's Chats are supposed to be carried out in the comments section, not in the actual video, so, yeah. Hope for those of you that watched this far, you actually found either some enjoyment or have something to pick about now. And pick about specifically meaning pick on something from the video, a vessel or something that may have been mentioned, but again, not all of them were covered because again, this was supposed to be a much longer video, but it was cut short. And even now, I'm not going to put the time in to do so because I want to keep them very short moving forward, so this is going to be the last one you're going to see of this stupidly long length. But that's going to be it, so be safe out there, happy hunting, and as always, I'll see you later.